Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberley Hoeppner, and thanks for joining us here on this Tuesday, September 8th, 2015. When we're not here on the television show, you can always check out our information by going to www.arh.noaa.gov or simply type in weather.gov, look for the state of Alaska in the lower left-hand corner, and then just click until you navigate to the destination of your choice. Or you can always call our weather information line at 1-800-472-0391. And also, don't forget to check out our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter pages on our social media. Along the top banner, you can usually find the social media and navigate to the regions around Alaska. So on to the weather headlines of the day. We don't have any warnings out per se, but let me step off the screen a second and you can read these along with me. We have a storm system across the eastern Bering that's organizing, so that's going to be the main focus as we head through your Wednesday and Thursday time frame. Also, the jet stream is amplifying across the Gulf, and this is going to help pull the moisture up from the subtropical areas up into Alaska. The cold air mass across the northern areas of the state, they're going to be dropping over the Bering. And then we also have impressive rainfall across South Central that I wanted to mention last night. Storm totals across the Anchorage area was in the range of 0.2 of an inch to 0.4 of an inch, but the airport received about 1.15 inches of rain there at the airport. So impressive overnight totals with rainfall across the interior areas only receiving about 1/10 of an inch, and rain across the southeastern areas ranged also between 1/2 inch and 3/4 of an inch, especially higher amounts across the lower areas of the southeastern across the southeast. Now let's take a look at this moisture here that I was talking about coming up on the jet stream. You can see this large plume that's just going to be streaming towards the Gulf waters. See, it's just kind of like a conveyor belt coming all the way up towards the Gulf, and across the Bering area is a little bit cooler temperatures, cloudy skies over there. Hard to see them on the IR this time of the year because the cloud temperatures are very close to the water temperatures. But on this next slide, you'll see the cloud cover is draped across the state all the way across the Bering, with a little bit of a break between the system that was Hurricane Ignacio, now just some remnants of that storm, moving on towards the Dixon entrance. So putting that into motion, you can see the cloud cover that's just kind of pulling in to the interior areas of Alaska. Got a little bit of a spin out here in the Bering. This is the system that we'll be focusing on for the next few days. So here we go, put this back into motion, and you can see the developing low out here in the eastern Bering. This is a large area of low pressure, and this cold air advection behind the system is going to help wrap up into this warm air mass here and become a very significant system as we head into the middle of the week. Now at the surface, we have a stationary front with the cold air just draped from the north slope back towards the west coast, and all across the Bering, the cooler temperatures are draining in towards the Aleutian. So the cold front is currently just south of the Aleutian chain with a very warm air mass, warm and moist air mass draped across the western areas of the Gulf of Alaska. And like I said, there is a little bit of a break across the eastern areas of the Gulf with the low pressure, occluded low pressure at the surface just crossing over to the Dixon entrance during the afternoon hours. Some breaks in the clouds were also noted across the eastern areas of the state and allowed them to warm up as they cleared out during the day. Now taking a look at your forecast for tonight, well, this low pressure system across the southeast is going to begin to break up. There's going to be fog with all the moisture across the area. Fog will reduce visibilities down to 1/2 mile or less during the late hours and across the rest of the area, we'll see rain across the Gulf, all the way up through the mainland, shower activity across the interior, changing over to snow across the Brooks Range and on across the Arctic coast here. We'll see some fog continuing all the way across towards the northwest coast. Significant snowfalls during the overnight hours will be focused across the Brooks Range, with totals falling up to 5 inches through Wednesday. Now, looking at the western areas of the state, we've got a kind of tight gradient with the winds blowing between 20 and 30 miles per hour, some higher gusts up to 40 miles per hour, closer back behind this low pressure center. Also, with the low pressure developing overnight, look out for winds across the western areas of the Gulf and the Alaska Peninsula. They're going to be gusting between 30 and 45 miles per hour all along this low pressure system, with significant winds also across the Turnagain Arm locations, channel terrain here. We'll see gusts as well between 25 to 35 miles per hour, with gusts possibly up to 40 and 50 miles per hour. So be aware that this system is going to be bringing some wet conditions, some windy conditions as it pushes north towards the Gulf. And the southeast is going to see a little bit of a break tomorrow, as they're going to be in between systems. So light rain, nothing significant for your Wednesday forecast. Across the northern tier of this state, this moisture is going to be pumping through and blowing winds across the Alaska Range, and we'll see showers with a possible thunderstorm during the evening hours on Wednesday. Across the Brooks Range, of course, it's going to still be snowing and along the Arctic coast, with the highest amounts again to the southeastern Brooks Range area up to the coast between 1 to 5 inches, with the highest amounts over the higher terrain. Across the west coast, generally a lighter showery pattern, with the winds gusting between 20 and 35 miles per hour. The main impacts of this system are going to be across the Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and the Gulf waters. Now, just taking a look at the western areas of the Bering, just some patchy fog and some light rain conditions here. Looking at your Thursday forecast, we're going to be seeing not much change other than this low pressure system making its way further north and just kind of elongating into this large low pressure system. Certainly a complicated system with the colder temperatures just draped to the north, lots of moisture pulling up and over through the interior. So rain amounts are going to be quite impressive, at least on average between 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch, with much higher totals across the terrain especially, and areas where you get some speed maxes moving across aloft. So expect the heaviest rain conditions across south central and areas of the southwest, lighter showery conditions behind this low pressure system, and this colder air mass is just going to be wrapping all around this low pressure. Cooler temperatures across the Gulf waters are going to be pushing towards the southeastern areas on Thursday, and this is where they're going to see most of their rainfall this week, is Thursday, as this next front catches up to the first. So be aware that you're going to be seeing the higher rain totals on average between 1/2 up to an inch, with higher totals as this system is moving through in some areas. So across the northern tier of the state, again, we're going to see that rain changing over to a mix of snow and rain just south of the Brooks Range as this warm air mass starts nudging towards the mountain range up there. And then along the coast, that cold air is going to be holding in its place and bringing the gusts up, and the fog conditions are going to stay across those northern tier as we head into the middle of the week. Across the Bering Strait, the surf conditions should be coming down, but they'll still continue to see seas between 6 to 8 feet over here, as the winds are going to be staying up between 20 to 35 miles per hour, with possible higher gusts. And then same conditions across the Bering as they remain on the backside of the low pressure system. Gusty winds with chance of showers, and a little bit drier as you head out towards the western Bering. Now today for temperatures, most impressive was across Eagle along the eastern areas where they had broken out of the clouds. So up to 65 they went, and that was impressive because this morning they started out at 25 degrees. All across the Gulf Coast areas, we saw temperatures ranging from the low to mid 50s, a few upper 50s, just mainly over the Gulf locations, and along the inland locations, south central saw 55 to lower 60s at Glen Allen, and the central areas of the state were also very warm, up in the mid 50s to lower 60s. Along the Arctic coast, where that air mass is in place, we'll see lower 30s across the north, and then wrapping around to Kotzebue in the mid 40s. The coldest temperature this afternoon was up there at Barrow at 33 degrees. Across the southwest this afternoon, they had temperatures ranging from the mid 40s to the mid 50s, with the rain and the clouds keeping them a little bit cooler, moderating conditions also across the eastern areas of the Bering, with temperatures ranging in the upper 40s to lower 50s. And that was all across the chain, as we have this colder air mass that's working its way down, limiting how warm they could get today. So for overnight temperatures, look for the coolest conditions across the north and northwestern areas of the state in the lower 30s to the upper 20s, and then the interior areas will drop down into the mid 40s, and as you get closer to the coast, the upper 40s on average. And then across the southeast, they'll also be in the mid 40s to lower 50s, and across the southwest, they're going to stay in the mid 40s overnight and down into the upper 40s across much of the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutian Chain. As we head in your day tomorrow, temperatures will moderate in the 50s across much of the chain and the Bering, maybe slightly cooler even. Across the southern areas of the state, expect temperatures to again rise into the mid to upper 50s, with 60s across the eastern areas of the state. Now across the north and northwest, expect temperatures in the 30s. They will not see very warm temperatures for the next few days. This is a very cold air mass across Barrow and back towards the northwest coast here. So expect temperatures to possibly be cooler if that air mass tends to drop a little bit further south. Now across the southeast, expect temperatures in the mid 50s once again tomorrow. As for flying weather conditions, not a good day across much of the state. A little wedge here across the east is the only place that is going to see VFR conditions, and breaks in the afternoon across the southeast. Otherwise, it's going to be widespread MVFR conditions, with the places to watch out: the IFR across the northeast, the snow conditions, fog, reduced visibilities. Also, don't forget, in the southeast, we'll start with reduced visibilities across the southeast and then improve through the day as the sun comes out and helps break up that fog. Across the Alaska Peninsula through the central Aleutians, expect IFR, and IFR conditions across much of the southwest and into south central. And along the Koyukuk, also look for conditions to be temporarily IFR in the morning. And then Anaktuvuk in more depth, we'll see IFR there, and Adigan Pass will also be IFR. And then we'll see Lake Clark and Merrill Pass go from IFR to MVFR conditions. Rainy Pass will be MVFR. Windy will be IFR to MVFR. And then we'll see Isabel IFR to MVFR. Looking at Mentasta, we'll go VFR to MVFR later in the day. And then Tanita Pass will go IFR to MVFR. And we'll see Portage at IFR all day, and then MVFR over at the west entrance. And Chilkoot and White Pass will start out at MVFR and possibly improve to VFR conditions in the latter part of the day. Now the freezing level is dropped to just along the Brooks Range here and across the northwest coast. Otherwise, in the upper levels, 2,000 foot level across the northern tier of the state, quickly warming to 6,000 along the eastern areas and all across the rest of south central and the southwest. 8,000 feet at the southern Gulf and 4,000 to 6,000 feet across the Bering. Looking at your icing, mainly concentrated along the front there in the north, stationary boundary there across the southwest and areas of south central. I'll be on the lookout for icing above 5,000 feet, especially in that Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and Alaska Peninsula area. Also, the jet stream is going to be amplifying here across the Gulf and bring that moisture on across all of Alaska, with the strongest jet just being along the southern Aleutian chain at 110 knots. Looking at your 9,000-foot winds across the low pressure here, we'll see the highest winds between 35 to 55 knots out there in the Gulf, and then a 50-knot wind across the Gulf, just slowing down to about 25 as you head inland. Across much of the state, we'll see 20 to 35 knots out of the southwest, and a northerly flow all across the Bering between 25 to 40 knots. Looking at your 3,000-foot winds, a turn around this low pressure system here at 35 knots to 45 knots on the Kodiak side of this low. Northerly flow between 20 to 30 knots at 3,000 feet, and then across the southeast tomorrow between 10 and 20. Taking a look at your turbulence, we'll see below 4,000 feet, the most critical areas around this low pressure near Kodiak, and then widespread isolated moderate turbulence across much of the southern tier of the state, the western areas, and then also occasional conditions across the Bering Strait here. So in just a moment, we'll be back with your marine forecast. Stay with us.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from GINA and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by AKwx to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and GINA's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that that would be easier to travel with, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state.
Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. Computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math, in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
All right, welcome back to the show, and now on to your marine forecast. Taking a look at the northern coast here, the eastern Beaufort Seacoast is the only areas where we see some ice just off the coast. Otherwise, we're still well open to the north of Barrow. Taking a jump back down to the southeast now, looking at winds for your Wednesday, we're primarily going to see a southerly wind across the northern channels changing to a northwesterly flow as you head towards the south, and same thing across the outer waters, a south flow with small crafts up here to the north at 25 knots, and then changing out of the west to northwest as you head to the south between 10 to 15 knots. Inner channels will see seas tomorrow between 2 and 3 feet, and the outer waters will be between 9 and 10 feet. Heading into your Thursday, we'll see stronger winds that day all out of the south across the area. Small craft for everyone except towards the north there. And then we'll see seas across the inner channels around 5 feet, and then across the outer waters will actually be 10 to 12 feet, not 1 foot up across the northern areas. That'll be 10 foot as well. Okay, so across the western areas of the Gulf, look for the strongest winds here between 25 to 40 knots. We have gale criteria around the Barren Islands and south towards Kodiak Island, the southern areas of the Gulf there. And then we're going to see winds primarily out of the southeasterly direction. Prince William Sound will be around 20 knots, and then across the Cook Inlet between 15 to 25 knots, small craft up there along the northern inlet, and also around the Barren Islands area west and Shelikof Strait. Look for sea conditions across the Prince William Sound around 3 feet, and then 8 to 17 feet as you head towards the southern areas of the Gulf, and then seas across Shelikof Strait and the Barren Islands between 7 to 8 feet, and then 4 to 5 feet across the north and southern inlet. Looking at your Thursday forecast, still strong winds again, but the gales will be confined mainly east of the Barren Islands, southerly flow across the Gulf, and small craft criteria all the way up to Prince William Sound and along the northern inlet, 15 out of the southeast across the southern inlet, with a change of direction, more of a southwesterly flow across the Shelikof Strait and towards the western side of the Barren Islands. Seas will be around 4 feet across the Cook Inlet, and then we'll see 6-foot seas across the western area of the Barren Islands and 7 feet across the Shelikof Strait. The seas in Prince William Sound at 6 feet, and across the western areas of the Gulf we'll see between 13 to 16 feet. Across the Alaska Peninsula, very strong winds here with a change of direction from southeast to the north to northwest. So look for higher gusts on the southern side of the Alaska Peninsula. Seas will be between 9 and 10 feet and between 11 to 12 feet on the Pacific side. Looking at your Thursday forecast, lighter wind speeds on this day, still out of the west and changing to the northwest and southwest on the south side. Between 5 to 8 foot seas across the Bering, and then between 8 and 12 feet across the Pacific side. For your Wednesday across the Aleutian chain, mostly small craft criteria for the winds here, all out of the north direction, and we'll see seas between 11 and 14 feet across the western areas and between 6 to 12 feet across the eastern areas. And then on your Thursday, look for winds being primarily out of the northwest with flow between 15 to 20 miles per hour with some small craft along the central Aleutians and towards the western Aleutians at 25 knots. Looking at seas that day will be primarily between 8 to 10 feet all across the area. Looking at your west coastern areas, northerly flow, small craft criteria across much of the locations and between 4 to 8 foot seas, highest around the Pribilof Islands. And then Thursday, a little bit higher conditions between 30 and 35 knots across the northern areas, gales across the St. Lawrence Island area and towards the south, small craft. Across the north and northwest coast, expect stronger winds on Wednesday between 20 to 30 knots near Kotzebue Sound and 15 to 20 along the northern tier. Freezing spray there for you along with fog. Thursday, very persistent but stronger winds at 25 to 30 knots and seas between 6 to 8 feet that day. Fog and freezing spray persisting with the snowy conditions along the north, rain and winds increasing across the south central areas. A little break for the southeast for tomorrow with the rain moving in for the rest of the state, and then we'll see a change on Thursday with this low pressure system moving to the north. Stay tuned and we'll be back with you again.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.